I think I identify with the idea of being a writer in exile. And, you know, when I was thinking about a subject, setting a subject in Los Angeles, the idea of those German writers who were forced to run away from Nazi Germany and wound up in a place where they, you know, where they couldn't use their most potent weapon, which was their language. And they were among people who began to do very well, directors and composers and designers and people who didn't need the language, who Hollywood absorbed with great generosity. And the writers were adrift in a way, and they were real outsiders, and I identified with that, and then I was very at the stage I am at now with Appomattox. I came to the idea of writing a two-act play in which the first act would be set in April 1865 and would deal with, indeed, this last week of the Civil War and the personalities involved and the thinking involved and the optimism of it. And the second act would take place exactly 100 years later, i.e. in March, April 1965, and would center around a particular incident, which was the murder in Marion, Alabama, of a young church deacon called Jimmy Lee Jackson, who, with his mother and grandfather, had gone to try and register to vote and found himself in the middle of a riot and was shot by a policeman and died a few days later in hospital. And that particular incident was what unleashed the first Selma to Montgomery March, which itself was bloodily broken up, and finally began to focus the minds of people in Washington, President Johnson in particular, on the urgency of finding some way of dealing with this whole problem. So once again, people came together and they kind of thought new legislation was there, and something would come out of it. I think this is Embers is a very, very personal play about real, deep, personal emotions, and to that extent, it's a private piece. But Embers is a very peaceful of soul, really, and I always find it very affecting whenever the various productions that I've seen. This is the very first American production, but there've been various productions around Europe and so on, and it's a very powerful story, which derives from the power of the novel.